Next is about the Prakriti. Sapta Prakritayo bhavanti doshaihi pritag dvishaha samasesha. The Prakriti is another of the very interesting and quite controversial also, to a certain extent confusing topic. Now, as far as the Prakriti is concerned, definition of the Prakriti, again, you will have a lot of issues about that. One of the most important definition is Shukra Shonita Sanyoge Yo Bhavet Dosha Utkataha Prakriti Jayate Tena Tasyame Lakshanam Shunu. During the fertilization, depending upon the prominence of the Deha Arambhaka Dosha, now that the Vata Pitta Kapha ratios, depending upon that present constitutional one, the whole body, the growth of the body would be depending upon that constitution of the dosha at that time, and hence is called as prakriti. So whether the aggravation of doshas at that time is abnormal or not, these are all the issues which we have to maybe discuss a bit in a different manner. I'll try to deal with that. तत्र वातप्रकृतिः प्रजागरूकः शीतद्वेषी दुर्भगः स्त्रेनो मत्सरी अनार्यः गन्धवचित्तः स्फुटितकरचरणः अल्परूक्षश्मश्वनककेशः क्राथी दन्तखागी च भवति अधृतिः अधृतसौधः अधृतसौहृदः कृतघ्नः कृशपरुषः धमनितप्रलापी तीव्रगतिः अटनो अनवस्थितात्मा वियति च गच्छति सम्भ्रमेण सुप्तः अव्यवस्थितमतिः चलदृष्टिः धनसञ्चयमित्रः किञ्चिदेव विलपति अनिबद्धं मारुतप्रकृतिः एष मनुष्यः वाटिकः अश्वगजगो गोम गो आयु शशक आखु आखु शुनां तथा ऋतकाकखरादीनाम् अनुकेः कीर्तिताः नराः. That's it. आखु उष्ट्रशुनां तथा, that's आखु उष्ट्रशुनां तथा घृद्रकाकखरादीनाम् अनुकैः कीर्तिताः नराः. Now, the Prakriti, the science of the Prakriti, how to assess the Prakriti, the doshas. The issue is, there are two important issues. We always say that samadosha, when the balance of the dosha is considered to be health. If there is a vitiation of the doshas or ratio of the dosha is altered, we consider as the disease. Now, if there is a variation of the Vata Pitta Kapha dosha at the time of the birth or at the time of the fertilization, whether it has to be considered as a disease or not, from our basic concept point of view, that's not a sign of disease, because at the time of the birth itself, there could be some physiological structure, and based upon that physiological basic structure, there could be a slight variation from what we call as the average. Now, when we say anatomy, in the anatomy, we have two words, normal anatomy and average anatomy. That what we call as a normal anatomy is never normal, never is seen like. Normal is always considered to be a sum of or statistical representation of the multiple averages. So we use the term averages, like, and it is true for all. Now in the current science, for all biological values or all sort of the biological measures, we use the word average, because the whole basis of considering which is normal or which is abnormal is based upon the statistical predominance. When you study any component, maybe a biochemical value or a structure in a large number of population, and then calculate the mean of it, that's what we call as the normal. But beyond that range of normal, there will be some variations which we call as the standard deviations. So those who are considered to have the standard deviations are not considered as abnormal, and hence we use the term, like whenever there is a biological value, you use a range, like for a pulse rate, normal pulse rate, like it's considered to be 70 to 74 is considered as normal, though 72 pulse rate is considered as the absolute normal. But you may not have a person, if you calculate the pulse rate of a large number of people, there could be very few who have only 72 pulse rate, and others would have some ranges of that. So that range has to be considered as a normal. Similarly, exactly in the similar manner, in the that formation of the zygote, the biochemical components of the body, or how the body grows, or rather genetic constitution, the genes which are formed, there would be some variations from what we call as the average or what we call as the normal, and these variations are to be the normal for that person, for that life, the ranges are, the variations are to be considered as normal. And though it's considered to be normal, as the growth occurs, there will be some features of the growth of this genetic constitution which could be seen later. Now, these features which could be seen may be assessed based upon the personalities, the intellectual characters of the person, the physical character of the person, biochemical functions like appetite and then exercise. So, the measures or the parameters for assessment of the genetic impact on the body would be of different parameters like physical, biochemical, and psychological, and the social relationships. So all these would count to assess indirectly the genetic constitution. Now I will come to that part now. In the current situation, what would be that view, genetic and epigenetics? I will deal with that bit more in detail later. Now in case of Vata Prakriti, a person is not a abnormal thing. A person who by himself would have a lesser sleep. By nature, he has a comparative lesser sleep, and who avoids cold, and who always prefers to be in a warm environment. And his psychological personality is of something like a temperamental issue. He is having a short temper and maybe having envy upon others. And so having that kind of envious personality or envious temperament is normal for that person, though from the sociological value, sociological assessment, it may be considered as a variation or abnormal. Or his physical features may be, he may have this appearance of a rough surface and maybe cracks on the skin. The correct tissue, skin tissue would be having rough surface, or the hairs and the nails, they will also be having relatively a thinner and lesser in this appearance. So keratin tissue synthesis is somewhat lesser than the average. Dantakhadi, he would have a tendency to have this biting of the tooth, or he will be producing some sounds regularly. Krati is who produces sounds regularly, or particularly when he walks, there will be cracking sounds produced, and he would have a unstable personalities, and comparatively his social mingling would be lesser. He will be more conservative, like he would not mingle with the people regularly. He will have lesser number of friends as such, and the prominence of the vessels over the body can be seen, have a faster movement, tends to move rapidly or move more as such. He would have an unstable capacity, and his personality is compared to the animals like horse or maybe goat or maybe these that rabbits and so on. So the habits of quick changes, like, so that's or maybe the birds like Rudra, Kaka, Khara. These are all the different birds, and this what is compared to. Of course, that may not have a very significant issue, and he will not be accumulating wealth. He may not be very wealthy person, and tends to have a morose personality. He tends to grumble more about the surroundings. Similarly, Pitta Prakriti, Svedana, Durgandha, Pita Shitila Angaha, Tamra Nakhanayana, Talu Jihwa, Osta Panipadataraha, Durbhagaha, Vali Palita Khalitya Justaha, Bahu Buko, Ushnadveshi, Kshiprakopa Prasadaha, Madhyabalaha, Madhyayushya Bhavati, Medhavi, Nipunamatihi, Vikrishya Vakta, Tejasvi, Samiti Chudurnivara Viryaha, Suktaha San Kanaka Palasha Karnikaran, Sampashedapi Hutashu with Vidjutu Ulkaha, Hutasha Vidjutu Ulkaha, Nabhayat Praname Anateshu Amruduhu, Pranateshwapi Santanadana Rujihi, Bhavati Hasada, Vyatitasya Gadihi, Sabhaveviha Pittakata Prakritihi, Bhujanga, Uluka, Gandharva, Yaksha, Mardharabanarehi, Vyagha, Riksha, Nakula, Anukehi, Paitikastuna, Rahasmutaha. Now, in a Pitta Prakriti, the person would have somewhat a yellowish tinge of the body, the appearance, the hue of the body would be somewhat yellowish, and he will have rather more fragile structure. The physical structure will be more fragile. The nails and eyes would have some reddish tinge, and similarly, reddish tinge is seen over the palate, over the tongue, over the hand, the palm and plantar surface. Tends to have this graying of the hair or folds of the skin quite early, tends to have more appetite, avoids warmth, and has a labile mood. He tends to become very angry very shortly, short-tempered person. Madhyavalaha, the total physical strength is comparatively medium, and his expected life period also is a medium, and he will be very intelligent, but at the same time he has a very high capacity of arguing. So Samitishu Durnimara Viryaha, when he starts arguing, his arguments will be always stronger. And when he sleeps, he will be seeing these dreams of maybe gold or maybe Palasha Vruksha or maybe the fire, etc. And in general, his personality is when if somebody doesn't obey to him, he will be cruel to them, or he will be very harsh on the persons who do not obey him. And at the same time, he will be very friendly or very cooperative with the person who obeys him. So that kind of a personality is seen in case of the Pittaja Prakriti. Shleshma Prakriti is to Durva, Indivara, Nistrimcha, Ardra, Arishta, Kashara Kandanam, Anyatamo Varnaha, Subhagaha, Priyadarshanaha, Mathurapriyaha, Kasajjaha, Madhima, Dhritimhan, Sahishnuhu, Alorupaha, Balavan, Chiragrahi, Thadavairashti Bhavati, Shuklakshaha, Stira Kutila, Nilakeshaha, Kutila Adi Nilakeshaha, Lakshmiman, Jalada Mridanga Simha Goshaha, Suktasan, सा कमल हंस चक्रवाकान् संपश्येदपि जलाशयान् मनोज्ञान् रक्तान्तनेत्रः सुभक्तगात्रः स्निग्धच्छविः सत्त्वगुणोपपन्नः क्लेशक्षमो मानयिता गुरूणां ज्ञेयो बलास प्रकृतिः मनुष्यः दृढशास्त्रमतिः स्थिरमित्रधनः परिगण्यचिरात् प्रददाः बहुः परिनिश्चितवाक्यपदः सततं गुरुमानकरश्च भवेत् सदा ब्रह्मरुद्रेन्द्रवरुणैः सिंहाश्वगजगोरुषैः तार्ष्यहंस मानुकाः Shleshma Prakriti Ivo Naraha. Kava Prakriti person would have somewhat fair color, and his body physique, this hue is compared to Durva, Indivara, etc. That's somewhat greenish or yellowish color appearance. And his body built is quite well built, and Priyadarshana, he always prefer to have some pleasant appearance. Madhura Priya prefers sweet, and his social behavior, sir, he always remembers the this help given by others, and he is always bold and tolerant to the stress and physically strong, and whenever he has an enmity, the enmity also would be kept in his mind for a long duration. His eyes will be yellowish in color, and he will be rich in a wealthy person, and voice also would be quite resonant voice like Jalam Mridanga Simha, the resonant voice. And whenever he sleeps, the dreams would always have Kamala Hamsa Chakravaka, the birds or Jalasha, whatever these resources of water, and Suibhaktagatraha, all the physical characters would be well built and will be seen, and his appearance also would have a somewhat nice looking, like, and his the psychological characters or temperament would be Sattvagunopamana, cool, and tolerates the stress as such, respects others, and he is having a very strong intention to study and has a capacity to retain the subject which he has studied, and then he helps others after considering all the surrounding needs of that. Only those who deserve, they are helped by him, and whenever he speaks, there will be always a definite word. He selects words definitely, and every sentence would have a definite meaning, respects others, and his personality is compared to Brahma Rudra Varunaha. द्वयोर्वातिस्त्रीणां वापि प्रकृतीनां तु लक्षणैः ज्ञात्वा संसर्गजा वैद्यः प्रकृतिः अभिनिर्दिशेत. When there is a combination of both one or two of these doshas, then the Prakriti, Dvandva Prakriti has to be assessed. प्रकोपो वा अन्यथा भावो क्षयो वा नोपजायते प्रकृतीनां स्वभावेन जायते तु गतांशः. Now that question, like whether a Vata Prakriti has to be considered as a disease or not, the answer is very clear. The Prakriti, that variation of the dosha constitution in the Prakriti is not to be considered as a disease, and there is no question of treatment. Whatever the variations which would occur later due to the ahara vihara, that has to be considered as a disease. And it is quite true that a patient of Vata Prakriti is more prone for the diseases, not necessarily Vata Vyadhi. A Vata Prakriti person also may be prone for the Kaphaja diseases, because his ability to or his immunity is lesser, and his ability to face the disease, tolerate the disease would be lesser. His compliance of the physiology would be lesser, whereas Kapha Prakriti would be having a better tolerance. So this has to be very clear. It's not true that a Vata Prakriti patient would have more Vata Vyadhi or a Kapha Prakriti patient would have more Kapha Vyadhi. Not necessarily. Of course, you have some descriptions, references in other texts like Vagbhata where the same is mentioned, but not necessarily. But the other way, it is true that a patient with a Vata Prakriti, even if he has a Kapha Vyadhi, the treatment will be difficult. A Kapha Prakriti, even if he has a Vata Vyadhi, treatment is comparatively easier. That's true, mentioned. Like, and in case of all the doshas, the Asadhya Vyadhi or Krishna Sadhya Vyadhi, there is a very specific mention like Prakriti and dosha. If they are the same, they are better treatable, and Prakriti and dosha, if they are different, then they are difficult to be treated. But practically, that may not be very real asset. We will come to that part again. Same. The reason given or the simile given by Sushruta is Vishtajato yatha kitah namishena vipadyate tadvat prakritiyo martyam shaknuvantina bharitum. As a creature or an insect born in a poisonous environment is not affected by the poison, similarly Prakriti do not harm the person. So that's true. Now, as far as the other issue like Sama Prakriti and the Vishama Prakriti in case of a disease, like a Sama Prakriti in a disease would have a better prognosis or poor prognosis. The references are there, textual references are very clear, like when the Dosha Prakriti and the Deha Prakriti are same, the treatment is easier, that's true, but practically it's not necessarily the same. The other way it is true, like a Vata Prakriti patient, it's always the prognosis is comparatively poorer than the Kapha Prakriti. A similar disease occurring in a Vata Prakriti and a Kapha Prakriti, the treatment will be better in case of Kapha Prakriti as such. Now, the Prakriti related to the genetics, from the current point of view, Prakriti is always related to the genetics, and lots of researches are being done about this, and lots of publications also are there. I will not go into the summary of these issues, but I will try to deal with maybe the problems with dealing with this kind of a Prakriti and the genetics as such. Lots of publications are there. I have just quoted a few of the references of such publications which are rather studied with a lot of background and lot of information is there. Now, coming to that part, like comparing the genetics and the Prakriti. Before going to that, there is one more issue. In Charaka Samhita, there is a sort of slightly variant description of the Prakriti, where the Prakriti could be again Shukra Shonita Prakriti, Kala Garbhashaya Prakriti, Atura Ahara Vihara Prakriti, Mahabhuta Vikara Prakriti. And these are the types of the Prakriti which can affect the course of the development of a body. Now, that question comes in, like, if it is only a genetics which are produced at the time of the birth, then whether the changes which are produced to the environment of the growth and other external factors which can affect the growth as such, whether they have to be considered as a sign of Prakriti or Vikriti. Now, to give any example, the texture of the skin at the time of the birth, it is always softer. When you grow, naturally the texture of the skin would be changing, it becomes hard. And the texture of the skin also changes according to the environment. If you are in an environment where it is relatively cool, the texture of the skin remains somewhat softer. Texture of the skin also changes in an environment where the environment is very hot and there is more sweating. it becomes somewhat rough as such. It is a gradual, natural tendency which is affected by the environment. Now, whether this has to be considered as a sign of Prakriti or not, and these are all the practical problems which you get in when you go into the assessment of the Prakriti. So, usually for assessment of the Prakriti, you will have a chart and then you will have a questionnaire, and then in the questionnaire you will be asking that questions like the appearance of the skin, hairs, and so on, and then you conclude. Now, there the issue comes in. Now, for that kind of an issue, what Charaka has mentioned is the Prakriti could be affected by many factors. Now, whatever you see as the developmental factors, the assessment of the physical characters, physical as well as psychological characters would be affected by one, the genetics, the primary. It starts with the genetics. Then the Kalagarbhashaya Prakriti, depending upon the factors which affect the growth in the intrauterine life, the factors which could be maternal as well as the factors related to the nourishment and so on of the fetus, the total course of the fetal life in the uterus can be affected by multiple factors. Then after the development, after the delivery, Atura Ahara Vihara Prakriti, the environment where the person is growing and his food habits, etc., they also produce the impact. Then of course there is one more, Mahabhuta Vikara Prakriti, the Pancha Mahabhutas, which are the component of the body. Now, from the practical point of view, clinical point of view, I would be giving importance to Shukra Shonita Prakriti and Aturahara Vihara Prakriti more than Kalagarbhashaya and Mahabhuta Vikara Prakriti, because Mahabhuta Vikara Prakriti is as well as it is a component of the Dosha Prakriti, because Vata Pitta Kapha doshas are the result of the Mahabhuta only, and hence the physical constitution is basically depending upon that. But later on, during the growth and development too, there will be some impact of the Mahabhuta, that environmental factors, like in a hot environment or cold environment, there will be changes. But that impact is comparatively lesser. Similarly, the intrauterine life and the impact on the body would be not very conspicuous, because at the time of the birth you will always have that net result of the Shukra Shonita Prakriti and Kalagarbhashaya Prakriti. So from the practical clinical point of view, though all the four factors are absolutely true and they have their significance, Kalagarbhashaya Prakriti and Mahabhuta Vikara Prakriti can be kept in the background. I don't say that they need not. This is to make this issue simplified. I would be giving more importance to Shukra Shonita Prakriti and Aturahara Vihara Prakriti when you assess the Prakriti of a person who comes to your clinic and then plan the treatment. Now, which of the character has to be considered as a Shukra Shonita induced or Aturahara induced? That's the big question. Like when a person comes to you and says that he has a cracking sound in the joint, whether this has to be considered as his genetic character or whether it is a acquired character, and so on. So the same is true for every issue. So for that we need to have some better solution, and how to get that solution based upon the contemporary views and the background. That's the point which I am trying to put forth. Maybe the issue is a bit complex, but still you can have some clear idea like how to deal with this. Then एतानि हि येनेन दोषेण अधिकेन एकेन अनेकेन वा समनुबध्यन्ते तेन तेन दोषेण गर्भो अनुबध्यते ततः सा दोषप्रकृति उच्यते मनुष्याणां गर्भादि प्रवृत्ता. So दोषप्रकृति is the ultimate, the summary of all these. The total impact of all the four is what called as दोषप्रकृति. In the Ashangrata also the similar issue are mentioned, but there it considered to be the other way, where there is a different view. शुक्रार्थवस्थी ही जन्मादो विशेषेण विषक्रमेह तैश्च तिस्र प्रकृतयो हीन मध्योत्तमा पृथक् समधातुः समस्तासु श्रेष्ठा निन्द्याः द्विदोषजाः. Ashangrata says the other way, when you have a samadosha prakriti, it's considered as the best. Nindyaha dvidoshajaha, the others dvidoshaja prakriti or the others are considered to be nindyaha. But I would not accept this logic absolutely. Of course, it's not that I am denying that part, but to consider a person as inferior from the birth itself or based upon his birth character itself, I think it's not justified in the current sociological situation. If you classify somebody or if you name somebody like he is unfit or he is not he is having a suspicious component of the personality, or maybe incredible personality as such, name somebody, I think that's not acceptable. So whatever Vagbhata has said, I am not denying that part. But from the current point of view, when we say that somebody is someone is better and someone is not so good or poorer, that discrimination may not be acceptable from the current sociological point of view, and hence we keep that information in the background. Now the other part, like whatever Charaka has said about the Shukra Prakriti, Kalagarbhashaya Prakriti, how it is seen from the contemporary science point of view. The genetics in the current science, in the contemporary science, is a new, relatively new branch, young branch, nascent branch rather, and the information which you get is relatively lesser. The almost, I think, certain basics of the genetics, the genetics are about the genotype and the phenotype. Genotype, the characters of the chromosomes present in the genes would be representing the character. When the character is expressed and visibly seen on the body, it's called as a phenotype. And then you have that recessive and dominant characters. Recessive characters are not represented in the phenotype, whereas the dominant characters are seen in the phenotype. That's very simple basics as such. But the presence of what we see, like the characters, the phenotype, now the basis of the genetics starts with the genotype and the phenotype. Genotype expresses the genetic constitution of the body. Phenotype expresses what you are seeing, have seen the impact on the body. But whatever you see in the impact of the body, what the visible characters, they are affected by the surrounding factors, the environmental factors, and based upon the basic issue. Now that kind of a science of dealing with the impact of the genes on the later factors after the basic structure of the genes, or the factors which can modify the structures of the genes, are called as epigenetics. Now genetics is comparatively a young branch. Epigenetics is still younger branch. It's the whole concept of that epigenetics has started comparatively very recently, and the fundamental basic concept of that epigenetics is the genes are formed, the recessive and dominant genes are formed in the beginning, but these can be impacted by the various factors, and the various factors which are summarized as development, environmental chemicals, drugs, aging, diet. These are the already studied factors over the chromosome. Of course, this may not be complete. As I told you, the epigenetics is a new branch and all the information is not yet complete. But these are what we get as comparative information. And you have some evidences that these factors will be impacting the structure of the chromosome. And the chromosome, the chromatin in the chromosome would have a methylation process. And a histone, a specific molecule is formed which would affect the shape and the structure of the chromosome present over the genes, and this histone would be producing alteration in the genes. So a genetic alteration produced due to the environmental factors are well known, and now at present these are well studied about the disease like cancer, autoimmune diseases, mental disorders, diabetes. With these factors, the impact of the histone and the epigenetics are well studied, but that's not yet complete. There will be many other issues which could be related to these kind of a modification, and this epigenetic fact has gone to the level. Now you have certain advanced facility where these epigenetic changes could be changed, what we call as genetic engineering. Certain new technologies have come up where the genes which are modified due to the environmental factors can be changed or changed back to the original position comparatively easier, and that's what we call as genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a relatively new branch. Genetic engineering at present is possible in case of the epigenetic induced genetic changes, whereas the primary genetics or genotypes, they are very difficult to be modified, and most of the experiments in modifying that basic genetics has not been very successful. Some of them have shown some success, but whereas genetic engineering in case of epigenetic factors is has been successful, and now is one of the maybe very gaining popularity. That branch is gaining very popularity rapidly, and maybe one of the considered to be the future. Now to summarize again, the difference between genetics and epigenetics is genetics refers to the study of heredity and the variation of the inherited characters, whereas epigenetics refers to the study of inheritable changes in the organism caused by the modification of gene expression. Now that's important. Epigenetics is also a factor for the evolution or maybe transmission of a character to the next generation. A character which is acquired by the epigenetic factor of a parent can be transferred to the next generation, and for that next generation it becomes a basic genetics. It's not the epigenetics. So that's the point, right? And genetics again studies the structure, interactions, function and alterations of the genes of a particular organism, whereas it studies the modification of the same, of course. Modifications of the genetics studies the structure, epigenetics studies the modifications. Then genetics covers all that process of the formation of the genes and the multiplication, whereas in the epigenetics it reaches to the level of the interactions of protein and the environment. So that's basically the basic same issue. And the epigenetics is studying the methylation and acetylation of the DNA, the chemical changes which occur as such. Now, as far as the disease is concerned, a large number of large studies are done and somewhat more dependable information is seen. Whereas personality and epigenetics, the number of studies are lesser, and majority of the information which we have is still primitive, and most dependable rather version now is the personalities, psychological components of the personalities. They are affected by both the basic genetic factor as well as the epigenetic factor. Now, based upon this is sort of hypothesis, the whole personality of a person, about nearly 50% of that is totally environmental non-personality, that it's not affected by the environment, and it could be like the training, education and so on which produces that. Then genetic personality is somewhat around 20% as such. Then genetic non-personality, genes which do not affect the personality factors, are around 11%. Now this is how it's a very gross estimation of the basic psychological factors or personality of a person. Now, and based upon that information, this is by a large number of study, rather summary of the study, references are here. And I again repeat that whatever these observations, they are not final, they are in the primitive stage of the observations. Maybe in the due course of time we may have more information, but with the available information now, the anxiety has around 53% component of the epigenetics, whereas 47% is the basic genetics, Depression, about 54% has a person who has a depression pathology, maybe having a 46% tendency by his basic genetics as such, whereas epigenetics would have a more impact on the around 54% and so on. So this is for the other physical activity, extroversion, the positive emotions, these are now assessed, and the average assessment is made about the impact of the epigenetics, that's Atura Ahara Vihara Prakriti, and impact of the Shukrashonisa Prakriti. The blue color represents the impact of the Shukrashonisa Prakriti, and that grey color suggests about the impact of the Atura Ahara Vihara Prakriti. So whenever we assess the personal characters, we have to keep in mind like whether we are assessing the Shukrashonisa Prakriti or Atura Ahara Vihara Prakriti, and it's true for every other aspects. That's all the point. Now, about the Bhautika, that Panchabhautika, Sushruta has given a clarity. That clarity is Pratimiha Naranam Bhautikam Ketidaho, Pavanadharatohi Kirtastastisraha, Stira Vipula Shariraha, Parthivascha Kshamaman, Shuchirata Chirajivi, Namasak Khiri Mahadbihi. Now, according to Sushruta, the Bhautika Prakriti again could be of three varieties, and primarily the importance is given to Pavana, Dahana, Toya. That's the Ap Mahabhuta, Agni Mahabhuta, and then Vata Mahabhuta, Vayu Mahabhuta. They are given the more important. Parthiva Sharira also is a component of the Toya, that's the Ap Mahabhuta. Similarly, Akasha Mahabhuta is a part of the Pavana, Vata Mahabhuta, and hence primarily the Bhautika Prakriti according to Sushruta is mainly of three types. The Parthiva and the Nabhasa, they also are there, but they are included in the same, the Apya Mahabhuta, Apya and so on. Now, if you look at the current assessment of the physical type, the somatotype, now there are, when assessment of a personality now is of two characters. Somatotype is about the physical characters and the other is the intellectual properties. Intellectual properties impact of the epigenetics and genetics to a certain extent I have referred to in the previous slide. Now, as far as the physical character are concerned, the current method of assessment, I am talking about current method of assessment, they are categorized into three categories as endomorph, mesomorph and ectomorph based upon the physical characters, the body size and appearance of the body as such. Endomorph is somewhat having a shape of plump and somewhat developed visceral structures. Mesomorph is a muscular body, well built, what we call as a well built. Endomorph is having a delicate, thin personality and having a poor muscles. Now, there is a logic, it's now proved to a great extent, there is a linkage between the same somatotypes as well as the psychological characters. This is a relatively new issue. Earlier, it was believed that the physical characters were totally different and the psychological characters would be something different. But now there is a linkage built up, developed and proved, like to a certain extent proved, like there is a linkage between that the morphic somatotype of the body as well as these emotions. Endomorph is considered to be relaxed, sociable, tolerant, something like the Kapha Prakriti. And mesomorph would be very active, assertive, vigorous, something like the Pitta Prakriti. And ectomorph would be fragile, restrained, something like the Vata Prakriti, which held almost on the same line. Now, the physical characters are described in the endomorph, mesomorph as such in the same, more detailed in this as such. And we usually, it has same thing, like almost similar to that of the dosha prakritis mentioned and the physical characters of the dosha prakritis mentioned in the text as such. Now, as far as the psychological factors are concerned, the usual trend in the current psychology or assessment of the traits of the personality, there are different methods of assessment of the traits of the personality. I am dealing with the more common and very practically used clinical assessment of the psychiatric practice now, psychological practice. From the basic point of view, one method of assessment is by 5 traits personalities. Personalities are characterized into 5 types: openness, consciousness, extraversion, agreeableness and neuroticism. Now, the issue is openness. The person would have a tendency to appreciate art, ideas, values, etc. Consciousness is a tendency to be careful, on-time appointments, rigid, etc. Extroversion, tendency to be talkative, sociable and enjoy. Now, openness is more characteristic feature which you see in case of the Kapha Prakriti. Conscientiousness is more features seen in case of the Pitta Prakriti, resembles that. I am not saying exactly, but resembling the same. And extroversion to a great extent is related to the Vata Prakriti to a certain extent. Then the agreeableness is a tendency to agree and go along with the others, somewhat amicable nature. And this of course is considered to be an acquired character. And neuroticism is tendency to frequently experience negative emotions such as anger, worry, etc., labile emotions, which is more character of a Vata Prakriti itself. Now, of course, to a great one of the new recent developments in the current psychiatric trend would be assessing the personality based upon the face reading. It's not related to basically whatever we consider as a Prakriti, but physical features and the psychological factors being together is a relatively new idea in the contemporary science, whereas from Ayurvedic point of view, it's a very basic concept which was there, and earlier people would had used to comment like about when we go for the Prakriti assessment, looking at the physical features and then correlating it to the psychological features was considered to be somewhat funny earlier. But now, in the contemporary situation, you have come to a level where there are certain now tools. Now there are some apps also, which once you take the photograph, with the photograph, the personality can be assessed, and this is about that basic idea of a frame of personalities, the different types of the traits seen on the face reading. Now, this is another of the issue. Of course, not a major issue from our point of view, but I have referred to this issue simply to say that whatever a older concept which was not really accepted now is becoming acceptable and somewhat considered to be high-tech technology, and hence whatever we have in our theories which may not be proved by the current science at present, if you wait for a few years, like maybe there could be some new development, and this is one of the issues. Now, anyway, but as far as the personality is concerned, from the current psychological point of view, the stress is more given to the disorders, personality disorders, than really the normal personality assessment. Ayurvedic point of view, all that assessment is based upon the natural behavior of the person and not considered as a disease as such. But now there are personality disorders which are studied more. So whenever we get an information about the genetics and the personalities, you get more information about the genetics and the disorders than the genetics and the normal personality characters. So though this is not a basic issue of the Prakriti, but we can derive certain important information related to the genetics and the Prakriti based upon these factors too. So it's not directly, because our Ayurvedic Prakriti is about the healthy person, and whatever I am trying to deal with now would be in the personality disorders and the genetics. But that gap has to be kept in mind, and maybe we can derive certain information about that. Now, from the current point of view, personality disorders are categorized into, are grouped into 3 clusters, and the cluster ABC. The cluster A personality disorders are paranoid personality, schizoid, and schizotypical, which is typical of a complication of Vata-Vyadhi or Vata Prakriti. Maybe to a certain extent have a tendency. I am not again saying that a Vata Prakriti person would have a personality disorder. It's not the issue, but there would be certain paranoid tendency. Whereas the cluster B would have antisocial personalities, borderline personality disorders, histrionic, something related to, maybe not directly and not obviously related to the Pitta Vyadhis, or maybe in a somewhat resembling that of a reflection of Pitta. Again, I repeat that I am not saying that the antisocial personality is a Pitta Prakriti. Not at all. That's not the idea at all. The idea is just to have some reflection about the genetics information which we have, and somewhat look at the view from the Ayurvedic point of view. So from that point of view, to a certain extent, the cluster B has some resemblance to that of the Pitta as the Pitta constitution. Similarly, cluster C has somewhat, not exactly, maybe something features like Kapha plus Vata. There would be a combination of both. That's the issue. Now, borderline personality, that's another quite important issue, which is considered as a important from the DSM-5. In the DSM-5, a borderline personality is studied well, and the genetics and the borderline personality disorders are studied well. So I am just referring to that part, because the exact genes which are responsible for that are identified. Chromosome 9 and the genes that are studied, and hence this is one of the information disease where we have more information. With the other issues, the information which we have now is comparatively primitive. So I am just picking up those informations which are freely available and which are almost proved. And that kind of issue is in case of the borderline personality disorder, where the condition is defined as a situation of where the person will have an impact on the interpersonal relationship, and associated with the marked impulsivity. A person would have an act on his impulses, and usually it arises in adolescence and early adulthood, and the usual features are, which are again quite common: intense fear of abandonment, or a tendency to have unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, identity disturbances, impulsivity in at least 2 potentially self-damaging contexts like spending, sex, substance use, etc., recurrent suicidal tendencies, marked reactivity of mood bleeding, chronic feelings of emptiness, difficulty in controlling anger, transient stress-related paranoid situations. Now, this condition is studied well because the incidence of borderline personality disorder has now become very common, and with the current lifestyle and the current issues, this has become very important. And about the borderline personality disorder, why it has occurred. Now it's almost proved, like the human chromosome 9 and the modification which occurs in this. Now they have found the genetic material in the chromosome 9 which is linked to borderline personality disorders, and this is characterized by pervasive instability and so on. The point is, again, this chromosome 9 modification is now one of the well studied issue, and the factors which can affect this also are now studied. And among the factors, the surroundings, type of education, family relationships, and the drugs are now considered to be the dependent factors for the chromosome 9 modifications. Contextually, though not related to our Prakriti issue, a large number of diseases which could be produced due to the modifications of the genes on chromosome 9 are now well studied, and the number of diseases are quite huge. So this is for those who have some interest in studying this issue of chromosome 9. It's no way related to the issue of Prakriti for the present. So I'm just giving you that information, like a large number of other diseases now are related to the chromosome 9 deformities, and genetic engineering is possible in these conditions. That's all the point. So that's one issue. Now, keeping this information in the background, we go to the next issue. The next issue is now Sushruta also has studied these factors, and the Kalagarbhashaya Prakriti and the Shukra Prakriti is one factor. Another factor is the personality of the person would be affected by the training and the surroundings, and these are considered as the kayas. Sushruta has considered the Sattva Guna, Tamo Guna and Rajo Guna, which is acquired later due to the training and the environment. And a Sattva Guna would be presented as 7 types of the traits. The personality traits, according to now what we call as the personality traits now, are described by Sushruta in the form of the Sattvika, Rajasika, Tamasika, Kaya. And the Sattvika Kaya would be Shaucham, Astikyam, Abhyaso, Vedeshu, Guru Pujanam, Priya Atitvam, Idyacha, Brahmakaya selection. Brahmakaya, who is a very aesthetic personality, where he keeps clean, believes in God and Veda, and respects the seniors, elders as such. Then the Mahendra Kaya, Mahatmyam, Shaurya Mahajnacha, Satatam Shastra Buddhita, Bhrityanam, Bharanam, Chapi, Mahendram Kaya Lakshanam. Mahendra Kaya person would be having boldness, and he has a command on surroundings, like, and he will be well studied, has a very high depth in the knowledge, the subject which he has studied, and he is supporting to his followers. Then Shita Seva Sahishnatvam Paingulyam Harikeshada Priyavadityam Ityetad Varnam Kaya Lakshanam. In a Varna Kaya Lakshana, the person would be having preference to heat, cold. He always prefers air conditioned room, and he is more tolerant, and his physical characters would be having that dense hairs and always speaks soft well to others. Then Madhyasthata Sahishnatvam Arthasya Agama Sanchayo Maha Prasav Shaktitvam Kauberam Kaya Lakshanam. Kaubera Kaya is again a Sattvika Kaya, where the person would have a mediating property, like he will be compromising with the surroundings, and always having a tolerance and having a better control, better tolerance of the money movement, skilled in money movements, and he is not affected by the loss of money or gain of money, has balance over that, and he has lot of potential capacity to generate. Then Gandhamage Priyatvam Cha, Nritya Bharatya Kamara, Vihara Shilata Chaiva, Gandharvam Kaya Lakshana. Gandharva Kaya Lakshana is more of an artistic personality, where you will have more creativity, and then preferring the decorations. Praptakari Dhruttanaha Nirbhaya Smritiman Shutihi Ragamoha Madadvesha Varditaha Yamya Sattvavan. Yamya Sattvavan is he is having a capacity to do the job perfectly, a persisting one, and has very determined body, never fears about that, and remembers very well. His memory is quite good, and doesn't have lots of emotions, emotionally stable. Then Japa Vrata Brahmacharya Homa Adhyayana Seminam Jnana Vijnana Sampannam Rishi Sattvam Naram Viduho. Rishi Sattva is the person who has more features of worshipping and believes in the God and so on. Now, these are the acquired characters based upon the surroundings and the training. Similarly, Rajasakaya, Aishwaryavantam Rautram Cha Shuram Chandam Asuyakam Ekashinam Cha Audarikam Asuram Sattvamirisham. These are all the features. I think we'll just bit faster because we have some more issues to be discussed. Tishnam ayasinam bhirum chandam mayanvidam tata vihara achara chakalam sarpasatvam vidur naram. So the features of sarpasatva and yeah, it's it. Then pravurta kamasevi just ahara yoja amarshano anavasthai shakunakaya, that's the birds, right? And ekanta grahita raudram masuya dharma bhashyata drishamatram tamaschapi rakshasam kaya lakshanam rakshasakaya uchchistahara taishnem sahasa priyada tata stri loluktam nirlabyam paishakyam paishakakaya and asam vibhagasma alasam dukkhashilam masuyagam lolupam chapi adataram pretasatvam pretakaya. These are the rajasakaya, 6 of the rajasakaya. Similarly, Tamasakaya, Durmedastvam Mandalaja, Swapne, Maithun Nityada, Mirakarismata Eva, Vijnaya, Pashava Gunaha, Pashukaya, Anavastita, Mauchyam, Bhirutum, Salilartida, Paraswara, Abhimardascha, Satya, Matsya Satvasya, Matsyakaya, and Ekasthana Ratihi, Nityam Ahare, Kevalerataha, Vanaspatyaha, Vanaspatikaya. These are the Tamasakaya. Now, the trait models in the current science are almost on the similar issues. And they have, now whatever we now consider Sastokaya, Rajasikaya, Tamasikaya, they are under the same category of what we call as the compulsive disorders. The disorders and the cluster A, cluster B, cluster C. Cluster A to a certain extent resembles to that of the Satvika Kaya groups, and hence there is a resemblance. Now, from the current point of view, in the psychology also, particularly when it comes to the question of learning and agility, particularly counseling for the students and so on, in that issue of psychology of a counselor, in that the trait model is something different. Now, I had referred to the 5 character trait model earlier, which is in the basic psychology component, and particularly the psychology related to the learning in the teaching institutions. The traits models are 7 models, and these are the cognitive and interpersonal acumen, change in the activity, drive to excel, environmental mindfulness, feedback response, and self-insight. Now, if you look at the Satvika Kaya, Tamasic Kaya, Rajasic Kaya characters, they are exactly the same. The same are mentioned and presented in a different number. Now, in Satvika Kaya, you have that different numbers, whereas in current science, they are categorized into 7 characters. So, virtually, they are the same, and this has become a very popular technique of the counseling asset. Now, to summarize, Kayanam Prakriti-jnata tu anurupam kriyam kareta Mahaprakrite-sveta rajas-sattva-tamakritaha proktaha rakshanatu samyaka bhishaktascha vibhaveta. Assessment of these acquired characters also are important before you decide about the planning of the management, and a physician has to consider these factors also before he plans the disease asset. Now, the last point which I come to be the more practical issue. In the present day situation, assessment of the Prakriti and the details about the Prakriti, they have become a craze from my point of view. I use the word craze because lots of technologies are coming up, and there are many Ayurvedic forums which give you that even online assessment of the Prakriti and so on. I will not go into those controversies. There are issues of controversies, confusions and so on. I will not deal with that. But I refer to the final, now because of these controversies, our NAM, the National Ayurvedic Mission, has ultimately published one Prakriti assessment chart which is available online, and this is with an idea of standardizing the concepts of the Prakriti and reducing the possible confusions in the assessment of the Prakriti. That a questionnaire is submitted, questionnaire is presented, and it's believed that all the Ayurvedic faculty would follow that questionnaire. But with that questionnaire again, there is always some scope for improvement. Now, from my point of view, now this is purely my version. There could be a lot of confusions. Don't worry, don't criticize that part. My issue would be the same can be improvised. That same NAM can be improvised if you consider the impact of the dosha prakriti and the aturahar prakriti in the same manner as we have discussed. Now, all that whatever you have discussed about genetics and epigenetics, based upon that, when I assess my prakritis of my patients, I consider these issues to a certain extent. This whatever I have given is a very crude issue. It can be modified, it can be improved upon based upon statistical issues. Now, when it's a question of assessment of the body frame, I am just summarizing this. It's sample questions from the standard questionnaire of the NAM. I have selected some of the standard questionnaires, question number from the same asset. And in that condition, the impact of the dosha prakriti and impact of the aturahara prakriti, that's the impact of the genetic and impact of the epigenetic. From our general knowledge point of view, a body frame, the impact of the genetic is more, and hence I would give a 4 score, and aturahara prakriti, it will be a 1 score. The importance would be, so multiplication factors for assessing the prakriti there would be more. Whereas the body built, the bulk of the body, the impact of the aturahara, that epigenetic is more and the impact of the genetic is comparatively lesser. The forehead length, now this is the number which I have just given based upon a general assessment. Now this is not supported by statistical analysis or structured analysis. This is based upon simple clinical experience. But the same can be modified, can be improved upon, and probably if we come to that level where we have a standardized format for assessment of the prakriti can be a wonderful tool to be given to the whole world of medicine, and it's not simply limited to Ayurveda, and it will be a very huge contribution. Instead of going for that multiple complications, multiple issues, we need to have a standardized assessment of the prakriti and a view on it. With this, let me conclude this chapter. इति सुश्रुतसंत्रायां शारीरस्थाने गर्भव्याकरणं नाम शारीरं नाम चतुर्थोऽध्यायः. With this we conclude, and we'll go to the next in the next session. If there are any questions, I'll try to answer. Okay, there are not many questions, like fine. So we'll conclude today.